Hi, and welcome to For This Child I Have Prayed. This is a podcast where faithful women share their journey to motherhood and how it has been marked by the goodness of God. Whether you are struggling with infertility, wrestling with postpartum, or navigating adoption, my prayer is that you are encouraged and uplifted by their testimonies of just how faithful our Creator truly is. Hi, and welcome to For This Child I Have Prayed. I'm Heather McCright, and I am so excited for this podcast and even more excited that you are here. I wanted to take this first episode to be kind of our intro episode and tell you the why behind why I wanted to start this podcast. So, for those who may not know me, again, my name is Heather, and my husband Skipper and I have been on over a year's journey to starting a family. And since this journey began, I have fallen in love with listening to other people share their birth stories and their journey to motherhood and starting a family. I love asking friends and family if they will share their stories. And I've even found a podcast or two that all it does is share birth stories. And so I've become quite the birth nerd and just get really excited to hear these stories. And what it does for me is restore my faith and give me hope and comfort and peace that if God did it for them, He can and He will do it for me. So, as I mentioned, I found a podcast or two that shares birth stories, but there were two things that were missing for me. One, the faith aspect. A lot of these women, whether they're Christians or not, I was lacking hearing what God did for them, how they leaned into their faith and into the Lord during a hardship, whether it was while they were trying to get pregnant, maybe there was a complication during pregnancy, maybe there was even a loss or miscarriage, or even while they were struggling through postpartum. I wanted to hear how God brought them through that, just like He's doing that for me. If it wasn't for my faith in God, I don't know how I would be able to get through this waiting period of trying to start our family. And the second thing that was missing was there's so many different ways God has blessed us with so many different opportunities and paths to start a family. And yes, the most common may be biologically getting pregnant and having a baby, but there's also so many different ways. God is not a respecter of persons. And so He can take us all on different paths to the same destination of motherhood. There's a lyric of a favorite song I have, and I hope I get it right. It goes, "The testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. That means what He did for another, He can do it again." And as I mentioned earlier, that's what I cling on to when I hear not only birth stories, but women share their journey to becoming a mother. I lean into that and I take that testimony as my own. I claim it for me. What He did for them, He can and He will do it for me. And a month or so ago, I wrote a blog. I have a business called Bar Where You Are, and it's on-demand bar workouts and instructor trainings and in-person and virtual classes. And I have a blog with that business. And I shared a very personal blog post. It was titled "A Letter to My Younger Self, Preparing Her for Our Infertility Journey." And I have been writing blogs for years, but this particular blog post had the most amount of reads and hits and comments. And the amount of women who reached out to me after I shared that, just thanking me for sharing and being vulnerable and opening up and providing a space for them. And they shared that they had been on a similar journey to me. It really opened my eyes that as women, we need a place that we can not only share our journeys and our stories, but a place that we can listen as well and find hope and peace, comfort, and faith in that. So, all that to be said, I really started thinking about starting a podcast. And I think God placed this in my heart probably a few months into trying to start a family when I didn't know that it would take this long and we would be struggling like we were. I thought the podcast would be a place to share a birth story, just another podcast that shared birth stories. And I always was like, oh, well, I don't have a birth story to share yet. So who am I to start a podcast when I don't even have a story of my own? So I kind of put it on the back burner of something that I would do later. And then after releasing that blog post a few months ago, being vulnerable and opening up about our infertility struggles, God reminded me of that podcast, that hope and dream that I had, and He kind of shifted it. And He placed the name For This Child I Have Prayed, which is Hannah's prayer. And I have found so much hope and comfort in that scripture and in those verses. And He just reminded me it's more of a testimony to share your journey before you've received the reward, before God has answered your prayer. And I know, just like I said earlier, that I've received so much hope in listening to other women's stories and journeys. I know there's other women who could benefit from the same thing. So that's how For This Child I Have Prayed podcast got started. What my hope is for this podcast is to be a place that women, like I said, can share their journeys and stories, and where other women can find hope and faith in that. And I don't want it just to be about birth stories, although there will be plenty of those as well. I want women to share how faithful God was to them through trying to get pregnant, complications during pregnancy, postpartum struggles, and even not the biological path. Maybe their journey to motherhood was through fostering or adoption or surrogacy. I want this podcast platform to represent all women, all types of stories and journeys, and their faith. So, I hope you stay tuned. I will be here every week with an episode with a new friend joining us to share their stories. A little later on, I will be sharing a little bit more about Skipper's and my story and our journey to start a family. But in the meantime, thank you again for being here. I really hope that you find faith in this podcast and it restores faith, maybe if it's starting to waver. And please share this with family and friends and anyone that you think could benefit from this. And I look forward to being on this journey with you. Thanks again, and I'll see you around.